It is a beautiful morning here in Massachusetts, and today we're going to be working on a castover for you guys. We got Benno against Alexhandr. It looks like this is a non-updated version of Enigma, so I'm sure that will make Veek very happy since he was looking forward to seeing some games played on this map. This map is a very large one, and I don't think that it's actually well served for 1v1s. We did play some FFAs on it, and like way back. And I think that was definitely a better experience overall. And, you know, because it's so large, I mean, that it just naturally lends itself to that. But at the time, I thought that we would be able to salvage this map or use this map as a 1v1 map. I was going to throw it into the Ascension tournament pool. It just turned out to be too large. So we're actually going to see a demonstration of that in these games here. I imagine they'll go fairly long. But we'll find out. And the other thing to note here is that this is going to be a little bit more educational. Something that I obviously try to do always when I'm doing castovers is tell players what they might be able to do better, or talk to the audience about how, hey, it's possible that you could do this thing better than what this player is doing, or here's how, like, an area where this is actually a really good and intelligent decision and whatever. Try to add that context. But I'm going to be stressing that even further in this particular castover with this map set. There's going to be two matches here between Benno and Alexhandr. And the reason for that is because I was explicitly requested to comment on that. Now, the thing about this matchup, as far as I know, is that Alexhandr says that he played pretty poorly in the first match and played much better in the second match. However, I don't know that yet. And also, this is a really, like, this is a much older game, right? We're still getting through the backlog as of right now before we start casting the pre-release matches that were played with the selection extender. So I am certainly looking forward to seeing those matches. But what we have ahead of us right now is a little bit of an older game. Both of these players have played games since then. The Mesk versus Benno game that was casted a few days ago as of the time of recording this, with the Hippo Wars, that was the title of the castover. That was actually played after this, so Benno has maybe theoretically improved, which, you know, if we were casting these out of order, so that he might end up looking slightly worse or what have you. I think Benno is, I think he might be early or mid-30s from what I recall. So actually Benno is in a spot where, you know, maybe you do improve with your understanding, but I'm not sure he'd improve mechanically at that age. Although, you know, don't ever count an old dog out of the fight, I say, because it can show the young crowd what for. I'm 28. I'm pretty, you know, I'm pushing 30 in that sense. I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, some young guns come in and think that they can, you know, push us old dogs around, and then we just go slap them across the face with my Cyprians. Speaking of, there is a Lakizalisk opener. I've been keeping tabs on the openers. Obviously, we do have a treasury, fast expansion, if you will, for Benno. Pumping out the Cyprians like it's nobody's business. And, yeah, we're going to see how that one goes. But at this stage, nothing too crazy here. Looks like maybe there was an Ovaleth, you know, the unburrow, or the attempt at burrow dropping. But he hasn't scouted his opponent. Yes, we're 3 minutes in, and the Droleth is only reaching the second position here, so he did go cross scout first. So he's gonna have to send his Ovaleth to the top right, and then he will indeed do that. Now, by this point, I don't really think there's going to be much of a threat. If he can get the Lakizalisk off in terms of burrowing, maybe he can still do some damage, or, you know, shut down some mining. But when it's just a worker transfer away from being completely neutralized, because you see this base here in the main, you can just pull these workers down here and you're fine. Yeah, it's a little bit annoying, but it minimizes the damage. And, you know, during this time, Alexhandr's not really able to do too much. He's got a Lakizalisk and an Ovaleth that's a very heavy gas investment in the early stages of the game, and so on and so forth. So he's going to go ahead and drop an expansion. Generally, I do like to take a look at, you know, do players send their worker before they have enough minerals to the site of the expansion. Even the AI will actually do this sometimes, thanks to some work that I did. That was pretty silly, actually, the way that I had to implement it technically. But, you know, it still works. That being said, you also want to be keeping tabs on your Ovaleth here, because, you know, you don't want to start taking damage from a lot of Cyprians, and then as a result, just end up dying. So I could see that coming from a mile away as soon as I saw that Ovaleth moving into the line of 6 Cyprians. So actually, that kind of goes for both players. Like, as soon as you see a disturbance on the minimap awareness, especially in the early game, is a lot easier, right? Because you're not focusing on so many things. That being said, Benno has 400 minerals somehow. So, you know, that's its own question of, like, how he's got that much floating money. When you're in this situation, you definitely want to make a decision to, you know, add more production facilities. The old quote is that since a Maverick costs 50 minerals, you know, you're thinking even back into Brood War terms, the Marine costs 50 minerals, your Barracks costs 150 minerals. If you have enough minerals to queue 3 Marines, you should just cancel those 3 Marines in the back while it's training the active one and build another barracks, because that will give you a better shot. So that's something worth noting. A Hydrock down on the way for Alexhandr as well. So, you know, fairly low-key stuff, fairly basic stuff. Anchor in the back line, not a bad shout. Now, the one thing about anchors in the resource line is, particularly in maps like this where they actually do have turret room, not all maps do have this, and I'm trying to encourage people to make sure that they leave space for, you know, defensive structures, because that way it doesn't interrupt the mining. Obviously, in CMBW, it's less prohibitive to do this because you obviously have you have the opportunity to build without pulling your workers all out of the way. So that's a pretty big deal. It looks like Benno actually was a little bit lax with like ordering his scout to even move around. He does have one missing HP chunk, but I think that was just the Drolla. Now we could be seeing a cheeky expansion in the top left corner here from Alexhandr. He does have a Lekizalisk and one down here as well. However, there is a force of Cyprians slowly moving across the map with the Antseal. I don't know if this is like sometimes when you're playing the game, you don't like when you're learning the game, when you're not really sure what's going on, you might not really know what's up, right? It's kind of interesting because in that context, right, he could have kept his worker alive there a little bit longer for sure. In that context, like this setup is really poor for Alexhandr. He has no defenses. He has virtually no units. He's getting more Lekizalisks, I guess. He's got a second Lekizalisk that he can burrow at the front. But with Antseals, something that you can do as a mechanic that people aren't aware of is it does redirect the projectile for the Lekizalisk. So you could station it like off to the side and then put a Cyprian down here, and I'm pretty sure it would redirect it successfully. But we might be able to see some of that. No, it doesn't look like it's going to happen. That being said, because the unit has to be in the area in order to pull the Antseal's damage, but as you can see here, it's just a massacre anyway. Some of these are softened up, but he's withdrawing to the cliff, and he wants to charge forward. Benno's macroing. He's not microing. So despite not microing, he's still going to kill, I think, every single Lekizalisk, and he only lost 3 Cyprians there. So that kind of shows you, I don't really think that Alexhandr could have done much better in that situation. He could have maybe pulled his workers to help with that fight to really guarantee it, but this is doing way more damage than it should. And in the meantime, you know, yeah, there's a bunch of Hydras out. Where did that worker go? I guess did that worker go all the way back home, or maybe it scouted and died? I'm really wondering where that happened there, but there is a base being set up there. A third base, but really it's a second base because his natural has been utterly annihilated. The Hydras can deal with this pretty easily. He can save this Atrosk, and so I would like to see him try that. Looks like he knows that he can as well. If you're ever standing on top of larva, which is hard for Cyprians to do because they have the penetration shot, so they would probably just kill it. If you're ever standing on larva in that sense, and Benno needlessly losing the Antseal there, you can actually use the larva, morph them into eggs, and then as a result of that, the units will start decolliding instead of shooting, so that's a small tactic you can do. That wasn't applicable in that shot, but, you know, if I see opportunities for creative uses of game mechanics to get a little bit of an advantage, particularly in a game like Brood War where, well, in a base game like Brood War, obviously CMBW is very different, but like a lot of the underlying systems are very similar. It's an opportunity for a little bit of efficiency. Like if you remember that trick and it actually comes up, oh shit, I can start decolliding his units with my larva turning into eggs. Like that's something that you can do in stock Starcraft as well. You know, pro players are usually pretty adept at avoiding standing there unless they absolutely have to because of that reason. So that's something that you can keep in mind. Now, Benno has not been very good at spending his money, even though he wasn't really microing his force. So I think maybe, I don't know if it's like his EPM, which is effective actions per minute, like EAPM or whatever, as opposed to his general APM. Like his general APM, you can still do a lot of things at around 100 APM average. Like that is not really that impossible. You know, you don't need like 300 APM or whatever to play competitively. I don't have that much when I'm not just spamming stupidly. So in that context, it's like, yeah, well, okay. As long as you're like, you know, when you have a moment when your units are not being engaged, like the Cyprians were just attacking the Hacharosk, he didn't even really like take a position behind the minerals or something to make it more awkward for enemy units to start with less range than the Cyprian to start like moving into that position, which might have guaranteed him the kill on the Hacharosk, or at least like did some more damage to the Hydra or something like that. Particularly with Cyprians, obviously, when you station them over here, if a unit crosses that boundary to go up above the Hacharosk, like the Hydra, the Hacharosk isn't going to absorb the damage at that point, right? So that's a pretty key detail as well. All that being said, while Benno was not microing and not positioning his units, he was also not really doing too much. You know, he did set up another base. He does have that starting to mine, and he did set up 2 fulcrums. But, you know, we still don't see a checkup, even though he definitely can do it now, so there it is. We probably couldn't have seen that much earlier anyway. I do like the Wraiths patrolling the map. On a big map like this, you definitely need to do that just to see if your opponent has a bunch of extra bases. And you yourself can take a lot of extra bases in a 1 versus 1 on a big map. So that's all pretty big. And he does have a pretty nice force here of Goliaths and Cyprians. Still no selection extender in this patch, by the way. We're starting to get to the higher tiers of, or higher numbers of units. So it's worth noting that. And I think ultimately, you know, the way that I'm seeing as this, you know, the Hydras are sort of being moved around here and working their way through. The Wraiths might have spotted one of these Hydras. It's not going to end up resulting in too much, although some of them might end up going into this upper middle base and annoying that. This army, this force, it doesn't look like a Hydra found it. We don't see any corpses or anything, so I think he's actually going to get caught off guard. He does have a lot of Izira cores. The Wraiths are over here, and the Hydras are thus going to be out of position. So if the Izira cores are the only things here, while there's a Droleth, you know, I won't say massacre. It only looks like it was 4 kills. Yeah, this is going to be a little bit shocking, I think, for him. Now, this Droleth ends up escaping. I'm pretty sure that the Anciel would have spotted it, so that's actually a bit surprising. But, you know, benno didn't end up responding to it, and the first 3 Izira cores to fall are doing so without the assistance of anything else. So this is probably actually going to be there's kill pressure here for sure. This is, you know, the Anciel's not positioned over the units, but it's almost, you know, superfluous based on the number of Cyprians. I don't think there's any other Lakizilisks. There was a tech up in the meantime, but I don't know if he's going to be able to get that finished. You know, at this point, the Hacharosk is still, yeah, less than half HP, so that was pretty much GG. So what I look at this game, and I think, is that, I mean, it is a big map. So I'm not really going to criticize people for poor scouting or poor intel gathering. Even so, benno did pretty well by building the Wraiths and actually moving them around the map and confirming that there were no other bases. And then Alexhandr had the right idea by distributing his units around. So it's just a big map, right? At that point, like when you're on the back foot, you really don't know what to expect. The one thing that he could have done, you know, he obviously flubbed the Lakizalisk with the Ovaleth, where he just like let it fall in. And didn't keep tabs on it, and it just so happened to like that's a common rally, is like right in front of your opponent's natural, and people know this from the Brood War days, so I'm sure Alexhandr also knows this, but restating it doesn't hurt. And in that context, it's like, okay, let's imagine where my opponent's units are going to be. Unless they're expecting a drop, they're probably not going to be in the mineral line. I can go first scout the natural mineral line, see if there's anything worth targeting there, or at least get some intel, and then I can unload the Lakizalisk and then move it up to the other mineral line, maybe get some destabilization there. But instead, he pathed it like away from the mineral line of the natural and towards the choke. So that's just a simple decision-making thing that he can do. Now, the other thing to note there is that he didn't scout the top right, and he thought benno was in the bottom left. I think based on some Mason movement or something, that where they met each other in the top left. So as a result, he had obviously sent it a little bit farther away from the edge. At that point, I think it's worth taking the extra second or two, or it's probably a little bit longer than that, but, you know, to path all the way to the right, or accept the fact that you're a little bit to the left, path up directly, and then go in from the left-hand side relative to benno's base to try to, you know, see if you can get some harassment opportunities. That also would have been, you know, fine. So if he entered from the left-hand side of the main or the south side, you know, below the natural, either one of those would have been okay, but he went in at a lateral angle and it just didn't end up working. So as a result, the Cyprians annihilated that, and then all of his early pressure went away. But what he chose to do was droll up and not scout, not confirm the position of enemy units. Wasn't expecting benno to do an early move out, probably. Maybe that's just play styles, right? But you still want to confirm. And so if you can build a unit, I mean, with Zork as opener, it's a little bit hard. Even just sending a Droleth there, as much as it hurts to not lose the mining, can at least give you some idea of what's happening, right? So you can like move that Droleth there. You can see the number of Cyprians. I mean, you scout 6 Cyprians, you know that an early action is possible. You don't know what other tech is there. That's actually why he kept the Lakizalisk in his main, I assume, is for anti-drop play. So I think in that context, it's like his unit positioning was a little bit off. Definitely the first Ovaleth being lost without gaining anything along with the Lakizalisk is a huge oof, right? And generally speaking, he did end up getting to tier 2. You know, that's good. He obviously was on 3 bases despite the losses to the like 7 Cyprians and the Anciel that showed up there. Also reasonable. Like the fact that an Anciel was built first, I mean, you have to assume that the Terran is going to go Starpad, but even like if you see early bio, you assume it's going to be a Starpad follow-up because it's usually not going to be instantly into Fulcrums. However, it could be, but you have to assume that that's at least a possibility. And as a result, only having Lakizalisks and no Gorgor cores to, you know, intercept the shot, or Zoryusalets to intercept the shots, that means that you don't have the opportunity in that context to defend your Lichisilisks from the Cyprian menace. And on top of it, there's probably going to be ant seals, right? Or at least that's a possibility. So you can't rely on them just being, invincible through invisibility, basically. So as a result of all of that, that's what basically set Alexhandr really far behind. And at that point, again, he could have sent a Hydra or something to a couple of different spots. We can see on the minimap here, he actually does have one in the third base. Not just to be annoying, but for, making the map feel less dark and foreboding. There's a psychological effect to not having any vision on the map outside of your base, and it doesn't feel good. And it also, I think, subconsciously makes you play a little bit more conservatively. So that would be what I would say as far as like opportunities for improvement. Alexhandr could definitely have improved his scouting and his responsivity, his snap judgment, his minimap awareness in that sense to like, oh, I see units on the map, or just even knowing that the Ovaleth is approaching the enemy base or where enemy units could be. That's often enough to provide a little bit of certainty of like, oh, I should definitely be on this. I should definitely be working with this. So that alone is a pretty big deal. And definitely something worth noting. So there you go, a little bit of educational material there as far as like things to watch out for, right? Be more aware of the minimap and your unit positioning relative to where enemies could be. Obviously, the rally point on the natural is a fairly common one. And then also just not just the scouting and map awareness part, but also like unit position and composition strength, right? As Zerg, you have to balance your worker production versus your military production. So in this particular case, he just over-workered and under-militaried, basically. And so we'll take a look at the score screen, and then we'll jump into the second game, which I, again, assume will end up being a little bit on the longer side. But either way, Alexhandr says he plays a little bit better there, so maybe I'll be providing advice to Benno more so than him. And we'll just see how that goes, so stay tuned. Back on Enigma, we have a round 2 here. Benno is Terran on the top right against Alexhandr as Zerg on the bottom right, so we actually have the same spawns as the previous map, and that's funny. Now that we are halfway through, in theory, in terms of the game count, because this is the second and final map, I'll just go ahead and remind you guys that coffee does indeed exist, and it's not just a drink, it's a website. But I don't have any right now, so I'll just drink some water. Imagine I run a sequence called Sponsored Sips. That's stupid. Anyhow, we do indeed have some faster scouting this time around, and Alexhandr will scout first, so I think that's going to give him a little bit of an extra advantage. Obviously, Benno's just going to go for a stockade. He normally does scout a little bit slower, so I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up being a bit of a, not a problem for him, but he might just have a little bit slower time relative to Alexhandr. They both scouted each other last, I'm pretty sure. So in that particular context, it's like, okay, well, we'll see what happens. Sometimes when you spawn in a certain environment and you're like, oh, I spawn in the same spot, or whatever, like, I'm not going to scout the same position. I'm going to scout a different way because I scouted a different way last time. Like, why would I scout the same position? But no, in this particular case, it actually is correct. So Alexhandr will be happy about that. And you could see here, just like the Ovaleth case, like maybe this is a case of him not being warmed up, he immediately went to his worker, right? Before he even found, anything, right? He went to his worker before it even hit the ramp. So he could easily just continue scouting and see the star pad. Like, he shouldn't burrow, he should rescout to see what the next structure is. If there is a next structure, like, this is all gives you pretty good intel. Is there a quarry, etc.? So that's something that I can immediately levy as like, hey, this is an area you can be, you can have some advice towards. And Benno might actually just take a path and he's instantly going to find it. That's actually pretty lucky. And in this particular case, there's no response from Alexhandr. He just loses the worker. So it started off pretty well. He instantaneously saw his worker that was near the ramp. Hey, I should take a look and see what I can immediately see. Where can I path around and stuff. Obviously, after that, could have continued to just task it around in like a, shift queue a bunch of move commands around the base to does a little circle. And then you can actually see what's going on there. But he just now realized, apparently. Oh, no, he said wrong hotkey. Oh, he made a spray. Oh, goodness. Well, there is a star pad, so maybe that will actually be effective in some capacity. Obviously, you'd want it closer to here if you were going to do that. Well, things are not going super well for him. He did say he played better this game, though, so presumably that happens at some point. Sometimes you just need a warm-up, though. Like, I know that sounds silly after you made such a silly mistake about picking the wrong structure. If Mesk is watching this, he will sympathize with you, buddy. And you know what? I think I can probably sympathize with you, too. I'm pretty sure that's happened to me before. But usually I cancel it pretty quick. As a pro tip, the name doesn't change to what it's mutating into, but the wireframe does. So obviously, these two wireframes are very different. So just an idea. Something you can... I don't know if that's really a pro tip, but it's a pro no-go tip. So does that count? put a 0 on it. Benno is going to go ahead and take a treasury as his expansion. His Anseal has completed, and he is going for some additional infantry. He's going to go ahead and move out, I think, with once the Cyprian finishes. But we shall see. Another thing that you want to tend to do pretty well, I think this is mostly a Benno thing, but when your worker finishes, just tab to the base, hit the spacebar or hit the function key that you assign for your camera hotkey, and just task the worker. Especially in the early game, you don't want idle, like that. Even that could have been faster, but that's acceptable, I would say, for whatever acceptable means here. That's a thing that you could do. It just feels to me like, that's one way that you can just get a much snappier set of, Mesk Wonders. I haven't studied his replays enough to know whether he does the same thing that I was just criticizing Benno for. Although in that particular demonstration, he seemed fine. We'll see how he responds to this one. But yeah, that's much faster. Well, maybe not much, but it's significantly enough faster that it's worth noting as the rate starts to scout. But Mesk Wonders, how does he have so much more shit than I do? Well, I'm usually, especially in the early game, a lot more focused on being able to do that. It's a lot easier to do stuff like that. So the Wraith will have an opportunity to harass back here because of the misplaced Spraith. However, the Hydras are here to ward it off afterwards. So at the very least, Benno will scout no expansion and, the extent of the tech and whatnot. So we'll see. Benno wasn't actually keeping tabs on where his Wraith exactly was, but he doesn't need to as much because it's a Wraith. So I still think you could move it and start using the, taking the opportunity. But it looks like maybe either Alexhandr noticed the Wraith or he's just going to preemptively build a Spraith there anyway to just give him full coverage. He has actually maintained pretty close in worker count despite the fact that he's Zerg. His worker will indeed find that, so they're dead even. But now there's a second worker production queue. There was no quarry fast for Benno this time around, so I think that contributed towards it. And he does have enough money to either expand or go for some more, stockades or something. So Benno's floating a bit of money. He's not... This is a stage where, his level of focus has actually fallen off a little bit before anything really happened. You know what I mean? It's definitely a situation where I wonder, is he getting distracted from real life stuff or... how's his focus in general? But either way, he does have an expansion up, so his money is going to be a little bit more effective, and he's building an anchor. I knows his opponent has Hydras. There is an Ovoleth here. It can load 3 Hydras at once, or it can grab a Kagrant, which has been mutated here, so that could have been what was happening. But it doesn't look like that's something that's happening here, so we'll see what happens. See if we get anything like that. Finally, we are getting an add-on for the Ministry, so the quarry will be up there for an additional worker queue. This does mean that it still gives the opportunity for Alexhandr, for now, to remain even with workers. He did just lose one, or use one, somewhere. Oh, I guess it was that Hatcherosk only now going down. I thought that had gone down a while ago. And yeah, you can see Benno's floating a ton of minerals. He could add 3 more stockades. I'm kind of surprised that he isn't doing that. He also can take this expansion. Yeah, looking at this game from Benno's perspective, it does feel like I don't know where his money came from. He just has a lot more money than he should, it feels like. He does have 5 Wraiths here. They can do some damage. I mean, this Kagrant is not even mutated yet, so they can just fly directly in here. They are not on attack moves, so they are just moving directly over here. The Ovoleth is on a patrol route, so the Spraith will be able to see these, but again, the Wraiths can just position themselves away from that. Unfortunately, a little bit of a poor unit control there. Means Benno's not going to be able to do too much. Now, it does take 10 Wraiths to one-shot a Hydra. Actually, in fact, the Hydra has 1 armor, so it would take 11 Wraiths, I'm pretty sure, or maybe even... Might even take, by the way, Wraiths, I'm not sure. I need to really think about the numbers, and I'm not going to do that, but that does force the Kagrant here. So the Ovoleth was actually not for transport, it was just for detection, which does make sense. And the Skittercore was out there. If he had a Skittercore for a while, he could have obviously patrolled it over here, left to right, just to see if there's any visible air units, like drops or something. That's the path of least resistance down to your base, so you can at least be somewhat aware of that. Vestry coming in, and it looks like maybe Benno will be trying a Goliath Cleric build. That's sort of what this looks like with a double Fulcrum. It does obviously have the Anseal for additional work in that sense, and the Skittercore is going to do its best to scout, but it's not really going to reveal too much, just the fact that this base exists and there's a lot of idle Masons. Going back to our conversation earlier about just tasking the workers on. Now, Benno did abandon his main in terms of mining. He doesn't have many workers mining in the main. I'm not sure if that was a deliberate choice or if he just never... I assume he must have transferred some workers around and stuff, but definitely a little surprising there. Oh, I should be noted, I can't remember if I said this at the beginning of the first cast, but I'm pretty sure this is an outdated version of... Yeah, I did say that. This is an outdated version of the map. It doesn't look like people were playing from the version that was updated to have the sane resource quantities. But nonetheless, an attack from Alexhandr is on to the third. Since Benno really likes to build only treasuries, you can punish him pretty heavily just by the fact that this has less than half the health, or about half the health of a ministry. And indeed, he is going to lose the treasury. So if he had just dropped the, considering he's a lot of money, if he had just dropped the ministry there, he actually would have been fine. The Azira cores are doing their best to try to intercept stuff. There's a bit of a sandwich happening over here as well. So the line traces are not dealing as much damage as they could have been. But because there wasn't really much splitting happening for the units here for Alexhandr, he definitely didn't end up taking as much of a decided advantage as he could have had there. So there you go. The Wraiths are out to deal with that. Wraiths are actually scrambling back home, and meanwhile there are indeed some Goliaths and some Clerics. So we know what Benno is up to. We can take a look at what's going down here. I see there are a lot of either recently hatched or idle, otherwise Droleths, so those should be tested on the expansion. The economy for Benno is much better, and he can get up to a tier 2 timing pretty soon, as he adds a second or third fulcrum, in fact. As soon as he saturates his... Oh, I guess he has full saturation on his gas in the main, but if he retakes this, unfortunately the quarry just exploded, so he won't have that freebie there. But has more workers and more saturation. Nothing on this ridge, interestingly enough, so Alexhandr not too interested in that, but he can tech up pretty soon. It looks like that's what he's saving for. He's pooling larva. Doesn't want to spend any gas when he's so close. Or does he? Because I think his gas count just went down. He got his Orcas. So that's kind of interesting. But we'll see what that really entails. He has a decent number of Hydras, so actually it wouldn't be the end of the world if he... I don't know why he has a Droleth in there. Oh, there he goes. He figured it out. It wouldn't be the end of the world if he just pumped Azira cores to back this up. That would spend his larva and save... Yeah, it looks like he's doing exactly that. It would obviously save a lot of other things. So he should be going for that tier 2. It's 450 minerals, 900 gas, so he will have access to it. Is there an Atlas in sight? Well, Benno has the gas just about, so I guess the tier 2 timings are going to be relatively identical here. If Benno is on the ball with it. Does he notice that he's got tier 2 money? He's a little bit slower with it, but he should be going for it now. No, he just spent a bunch of gas on Goliath, so tell a lie. The Wraiths are not gathering any intel. Despite the fact that there are Ovoleths here, you can still see, like, okay, is there a third base? Is there, more stuff happening? What's going on? And at the same time, Alexhandr could be spending some of his money on more military units afforded by the Zorkas. If he's going to build it, he should probably use it. Now, sometimes you can build it just for the sake of having the option later on, but at that point, it feels like you could probably have optimized your build a little bit so that you built it. Because that's 150 gas, like he could have actually gotten his tier 2 a little bit faster. I still don't see an Atlas here. Well, I mean, there's no gas for it just yet. There's about to be some. So maybe Benno will go for it now. He seems to be busy moving his units around. So, yeah, now he's going to go ahead and drop it. So it is markedly slow, right? It's the Iral Iris is just about to finish as that Atlas goes down. So that's going to be a bit of a problem there for Benno by comparison, because now we're going to be able to see the Bactylisks come in relatively soon. And as soon as, basically as soon as Alexhandr sees that it's Goliath Cleric, he can go for Bactylisks, and there's not really much that these Terran units can really accomplish. Now, again, this is a very large map, and it's going to be Izcag, actually, so Kagralisks are probably on the mark on the in the cards here. And again, I think versus Kagralisks specifically, you probably do want undeployed Madrigals or deployed Phalanxes. So some Hydras do get warded off there. Not a huge engagement, a third being taken a little bit more forward. This has 3 geysers, so I don't think that has that in the updated version. I might have 2 geysers in a ridge or something. But it's obviously more lower on the mineral count. Still no Gorgrel, so Alexhandr actually not pivoting immediately into Bactyls. And once this Atlas gets dropped, like fully finished, I think we will probably see the patented Benno, double starport, double add-on the fulcrums and stuff. He'll just left the star pad, I imagine, after this Wraith comes in, or he'll move the fulcrums themselves. I guess he has to move the fulcrums if he wants to use the triple add-on, so we'll see what he just ends up doing. This base is going to get tickled, and it will die, actually, so very slow on the draw. I don't think he had any units in the choke or anything in the rally, so that is going to be a little bit painful here, because obviously he would have liked to just have a third base, and I think that means that Benno is once again going to claim the economic advantage. He's even taken a Mesk expansion, as I like to call these, a hidden expansion on here, and he'll drop some Sentinels, because his opponent's army is mostly ground at this stage. Now, the Izcag is finished. The tier 2 defenses are starting for the air. as well as the Scorch Wraith for that base. The Lachesis are on the way. Still no mutated structures for the tech. And what is it? It is Kagralisk. So the other thing that I was going to say is Almaxilisk should work pretty well, especially considering this base in particular has very limited in the way of anti-air defenses. There's a bunch of basins being rallied over there, so that will be staffed fairly soon. And Benno is going to go ahead and drop I assume he's going to be dropping a quarry over there at some point, and all of the good stuff that entails. Still not using his tier 2 for anything other than the Sentinels so far, so we'll see what he's planning. Again, feels like maybe the timings of using the tech that you've acquired are a little bit off. But now that there are Lachesis, they can, do pretty well. There is an Ant Seal here for vision, so you do want to protect them. Maybe stop the Goliaths from being able to step forward and focus them down. One of them isn't even burrowed, so we'll really have to wait and see what Benno wants to do here. More units on the way. Just more Goliaths for the most part. Spending a lot of APM to set these bases up, and he does have the Wraiths that are going to reveal this position, which is actually going to be quite effective. He sees the burrowing Lachesis, and that should tell him that there's some there, but he doesn't move the Wraiths, so they just all explode. Even that one explodes. Okay, he has 3 more for vision at least, but that was really unnecessary. He didn't kill a single unit. So it feels like maybe I don't know what Benno's thoughts were exactly there, but you know what? I don't claim to know the thoughts. I assume it's just Maverick. And he's going for some starports. So it looks like he still wants to go for the air, but he has scouted no air units other than an Avaleth and that one Skither Core that he killed earlier. So with a Quasrock out and the Gorgol out as well, that's going to turn into a Leveril. That's going to be effective because you can go for Calcalisks from Naths. You can go for Lyrilisks as well with the bounce attack. They're like a shorter range, not really like a Bactylus because they don't really serve quite the same role, but they do end up working pretty well overall for adding that level of oomph from the short range bounce attack compared to the Bactylus, which is a little bit more on the long range side. But our players are playing fairly passively. Now, Alexhandr does have pretty good map control with this position, but and he's going to go ahead and patrol with this Avaleth, which isn't a bad shout. But he doesn't have vision on where his enemy actually is, so he's going to go ahead and move up. Where's he going? Pathing all the way over here. I don't know if he's... Oh, yes, he scouted it with a Hydra, so he's going to go ahead and siege that base. That does open him up to be a, counterattacked, and that force with the Goliath Cleric is quite significant, where I would heavily criticize this move because of the fact that if Benno just counterattacks instead of trying to defend, or if he happens to be moving out at the same time, he's going to scout the disappearance of that force. The Wraiths are going to get his intel. He can just charge in and kill the natural and then kill your main. Like, you can do nothing against that force. Particularly since you're rallying even the Zorius further up, right? So I don't know if that was cited exactly. More Sentinels are on the way. Like, he can just stall. He can consign this base. But instead, he's actually going to try to chase it down. So I criticize this move from Benno as well. He can just counterattack and kill. He can deny the third before it even gets set up again. He can kill this natural, which would be the juicier target, even though some of the minerals are being depleted. He can obviously pressure the main. Like, there's so much stuff that he can do here, but instead he's going to go ahead and try to save a base that he can't possibly save in terms of the timing. So he realizes that now. He's still torn between 2 worlds, it looks like. And yeah, at this point, like, he could have been already at the front gates here with the army timing. So the only reason this move worked from Alexhandr is because Benno made a equally dumb decision afterwards. Like, this is such a horrible decision in terms of, like, being vulnerable. He really didn't have any vision to make that kind of play. Now, he could have sent a couple units, like maybe a third of his army could have been sent over here, and then he could have at least, like, held off the counterattack if it did come in. And it still probably would have killed the base because it's just a treasury. It's not a ministry. So you could have stomped the Sentinels, killed the ministry, and then picked off some of the workers before your units inevitably died. At this stage, now he's got the high ground, and Benno is mistakenly trying to siege this base. There are only Kagralisks, no Bactylisks. The Lachesis are going to try to burrow on the ramp. The Ant Seals can obviously deal with them if they so desire. You can actually just station Wraiths over there as well with the Ant Seal, funnily enough, and just start picking them off. But overall, yeah, at this point, Benno is going to suffer some losses. What has he got for tier 2 tech? He's got 5,000 minerals. That's a pretty good thing to have for tech, I guess. And he can go for a Daedala pretty soon. So, yeah, what's he want to do about that? What's he going to do about that? He's got so much money. He's still fighting over here. We're losing Goliaths. We're losing some Hydras, not really many. Most of the forces off in this direction. Clark's dying miserably. Benno just going to try to evacuate the rest of his units. Man, I really look forward to the Goliath re-render when it's not fucked perspective-wise, and it actually has like a more interesting walk cycle, I would say. And a more sane shadow as well, for a matter of fact. So we're slowly making everything more consistent, guys. I promise. There is a Quasrock, well, a leave roll. We could conceivably see Quasilisks, and you can see probably one of the last castovers to feature them, considering that graphic is also going to be updated. One more shot. Ooh, got him. All right, the Sentinels are being deployed. Is the Daedala down? Yes, it is. Not really much else going on, though. He's got some Palladiums, finally. He's not trained anything with them? I don't see any phalanxes or anything. Some units are tisming. So, does Alexhandr want to try to break this base, or does he just want to go for the natural, which is much less defended, because it doesn't have the cliff advantage? That's the question here. He doesn't really know that it's much less defended, and now the Goliaths and Gorgons are here. So, some of the Gorgons are getting popped by the Cags. That's not too bad. The Air Force will be heavily limited. The rates are also falling. But the Cagralists weren't being microed. The flank on this side was not as effective as I think Alexhandr was hoping it would be, because some of his forces were already... First of all, they were left behind. Now, the two Lakissilisks do burrow and get tons of Mason kills, so that's pretty legit. But Alexhandr is still down in workers, so that already kind of tells you everything you need to know there. Despite losing, like, it was probably something like 15, 20 workers here that he lost. He still was not going to be, able to really make it happen. Anseal positioning could be better. Not very solid. But at the very least, he occupies the Cagralisks long enough for the Goliaths to get into a position to actually fight them without getting totally annihilated. And yeah, Benno has this base as well, so pretty good economy, all things considered. One thing Benno knows how to do is train Masons. Daedala is nearing completion. Tier 3 not in the cards at all for our Zerg player. Is getting some Kafralosks, or a Kafralosk at the very least. So what you want to do with this is obviously have them on a different control group than your Hatcherosks and Larvosks, because they provide different kinds of larvae. He's getting some Avigralisks. We'll see what he wants to do with the Oxal larva. For people who don't know, this allows you to mutate directly into the advanced strain. We haven't seen any advanced strains at all in the whole game, which is kind of funny. Phalanxes are out. So this basically means that he'll be able to get, like, he can go straight into Bactyl or Vithrilisk or anything like that. Phalanxes will start to try to deploy over here in this position. If you're a Terran player and you're taking notes, if you have Phalanxes, you really want like an Anchor or a couple of Sentinels or something to just draw some fire and also spot, because I think the Sentinels in particular has higher vision range. You definitely want something like that as like a buffer before your Phalanxes get engaged upon, particularly with like Bactylisks or anything like that, which are being trained by the Kafralosk at this point. I usually don't like making my main structures in a base Kafralosks, but generally speaking, that's just because you train workers with them, right? You can do it. It's not really that big of a deal. It's just a personal preference. But I would, there's all this territory over here you can make macro hatches with. The move out is occurring. There is no Anseal immediately over in this direction. I'm not sure where it actually was lingering. So that's going to cause some issues, because he's not moving a Goliath on top of this Lakissilis. So that first Phalanx is already dead. Second one is not long for this world either. There's a couple more over here. One in tank mode as well. The Zorius are definitely going to be effective at buttressing the attacks. The Vigoralisks moving in. While they're moving, they attack up to 4 targets, and while they're stationary, they can attack 1 target 4 times. Anseal finally shows up, but it's a little bit too late to actually do anything about the Lakissilis, which is now basically out of the fight because the Terran army has been pushed back. And with the Zorius is continuing to... There's still even one left alive. The Avigralisks, I don't think they've died. Oh, no, 2 of them did die. So tell a lie about that. So not really the end of the world for Benno, but he definitely lost an advantage with his army. That's again, like, you didn't have any Sentinels over here. You didn't have anything to fall back to, really. Like, it was too far away to fall back to. His Gorgons are out just hunting for any additional bases that were taken, but we know that that's not the case. There's a bottom middle, but that's about it. Alexhandr not really expanding behind this, but he's keeping his money low, unlike Benno. At this stage, I don't think that this army is going to be enough to... certainly not enough to break Benno on the side of Alexhandr, but Benno's going to lose a lot of stuff here. And we're on this side of the map. Like, the military units for Alexhandr are a little bit more expendable. Ant seals are over here, rallied, not helping. Very unfortunate. Phalanxes will clean the rest of this up. And remember, if the Bactylisk is trained by a Kaffirlisk, it does not regress into a Hydralisk. So that's a pretty significant blow. If you're, taking these longer sustained fights, maybe you want to take your Hydra and remorph it into a Bactylisk after if it stays alive. You don't have that opportunity if you're training them from Kaffirlisk. So it's more of like a timing sort of idea. That base in the bottom middle still far away from being saturated. A Mothrock Spire has been made. And Alexhandr is sort of moving towards the 1800 gas required of the Othstal Lava Form for Tier 3. So we'll see if he wants to continue to do that. He has got more gas than minerals, so that is points in his favor for that. And I'm thirsty, so sponsored sick time, LOL. Double dip. We do obviously have a pretty reasonable set of defensive forces for... Well, it's actually kind of light compared to what I was expecting it to be. This base finally being taken. Feels like that could have been taken a long time ago. Wraiths continuing to move around the map, which is not a bad idea at all. I think, yeah, he will eventually find this Hatrosk, so that's not bad whatsoever. It'll take a little while. Just doing this at various stages of the game, since you have the Wraiths, you have the Wraith production. Like, why not? Like, they're pretty good as scouting units. On big maps, on longer games, you really want all the intel that you can get, that you can reasonably parse, is obviously sometimes it's really hard to do that. We do have a ton of Sikralisks and a ton of Bactylisks. Again, these ones are... there's no actual printout for this, which is something that we should definitely fix, but we don't know which ones are going to regress and which ones are not. Ideally, we would just have a visual, like, I don't want to say tint because that's pretty lazy, but maybe like a different model would be used, like a different sprite would be loaded for the ones that are not going to regress. And it wouldn't be like silhouette changes, it would just be like coloration changes that aren't lazy enough as a tint. When we have full model control of everything, because we've actually got renders for everything, that will probably make a little bit more sense. I don't think this Wraith actually spotted this Hatrosk being put down, so that will not be on permanent vision for Benno. Again, another thing that would be really nice to be able to do is, especially in games like this where you're not sure which, what the other player sees, just, to tag in, their vision by clicking the names or what have you. I don't even think Remaster does that correctly, so... Well, at this stage, we do have enough gas for the Tier 3, but not enough minerals. It's 900 minerals for that, so he's going to need to wait a little bit before he gets up to that number, but it's fast approaching. Does he even know? He's still he's still training units. He's still getting Tethzora cores and stuff. He only has the one Kaffirlisk. Oh, no, he has a second one in his main. Okay. And the engagement is happening. So while this is happening, we got to keep tabs on that gas. If it massively depletes during the battle, we got to commend Mr. Alexhandr for his spending. A Minotaur has been created. And unfortunately, it's stationed right over the ground unit, so the Vithralisks are debuffing the ground units at the same time. The Armor Rend, excellent to allow the Bactylisks to happen. And hey, we didn't see a Tier 3, but we did see a GG. And that was apparently enough. So yeah, Benno in a very vulnerable position. He had some good intel on the number of bases, but his army comp and his unit positioning was not going to be set up to succeed in that particular fight. I think overall, the biggest thing was that he... Like, the big swing in the game was when Alexhandr made the fatal, what should have been a fatal mistake to attack the top left, which is so far away from the rest of the map. You can't affect any additional change. You can't siege the natural or the main. You can't really threaten anything because the counterattack can occur, and while that counterattack can occur, an insurance policy and additional units and static defense can be set up in the main and natural such that you can't do anything after you kill that base in the top left. Yes, it's a blow to the economy, but the counterattack could have just ended the game in terms of at least setting Alexhandr so far behind. He has to pull his army back and try to answer that, and by that point he's lost a lot of map pressure, a lot of tempo. That would have definitely allowed Benno to be in a much more commanding position, maybe even win the game. He probably did have kill pressure, so that's something that you have to keep in mind. Despite that, I think Alexhandr did indeed play better this time around. The Tier 2 timing for Benno was a little bit slower than it should have been, and the Tier 3 timing for Alexhandr was slower than it should have been, but he had won the game by that point apparently, so that's something that I didn't expect. That being said, that is going to be our cast over. This is cast over number 68, which means the next cast over is number 69, and it is a cast over that you guys are going to like. You guys are going to like this. It's also on Enigma, our 3-part series on this map, concluding with that one. So stay tuned for that, and of course, we'll have some more coming your way because more games are being played, more replays being sent, and that means you actually. And of course, we'll take a look at the other things to the score screen so you can see the number of units constructed and lost. And the resources. Benno, once again, winning in the resource department, but not really in terms of actual gameplay. So he's going to have to improve that, spend his money a little bit more, and that's my advice. Hopefully it was an educational and informative cast over for the two players involved and for anybody else watching along who wants to learn a thing or two. And with that, I sign off. Until next time.